Pat Hill, what's wrong with the ball players living in the city limits, living with us, in the hood?
Well, I can kind of reflect back on when I was an athlete, although female athletes are never on the caliber money-wise as the male athletes. But I recall, especially the African-American athletes, basically living in their own communities. And it proved a win-win for both. Number one, it gave young people somebody famous to aspire to become and say that they know and interact with. And it also was a form of protection for the athlete in that they were believed to be of high regard, high status, so people looked out for them. So now I think what we're seeing is what can happen ultimately, no matter how much money you make, that when you're not in your own community, and you're isolated in a desert, you're really not protected. And apparently alarms aren't going to save you because they're all electronic and people know how to circumvent them. And so the houses are so far apart and things can happen and people don't know. So you're really kind of left quite vulnerable, and I think it's unfortunate.
Well, one point on that, last point of this segment is that the young man who was killed, ball player for the Washington Redskins, I don't think he lived in the neighborhood.
Right, no, he didn't.
I forget exactly where, but the point is that you feel that if he lived in the neighborhood, that may not have happened to him.
Well, I think
he may not have been murdered.
I think the lifestyle also that many of these guys lead, and I'm not doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning quarterback. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing, his father is a police chief. And they wanted to bring out this kid's past, but I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I think it's the lifestyle in terms of being the bling bling athlete. I feel just that if he were around his own people, and if he were living his life in the manner that people would look up to him as supposedly living, he would have been more protected. His life may have been more open. More people would have known about him. But then, contrastly, because of the kind of lifestyle these guys live, they feel as though that they are a target because they are so well off financially, and there's a lot of jealousy. And then they're young. Many of them come out of an element where a lot of the guys are unemployed in their generation. They're not highly educated. They haven't had certain opportunities, and so they're living the subculture. But it appears to me it doesn't matter. These guys still frequent those areas where those people are. They party with them.
They come to the hood to party, right? They go out to the suburbs to live. Okay.
And so it's inconsistent. So there should be some consistency. If your homie is good enough for you to hang with the party and to get involved in those other things with, well, how come you can't live in a community where your people are struggling to pay taxes or not struggling to pay taxes? When you're in a certain financial, economic group, you live in a certain community, but those communities used to be in the city. And those communities used to be among black people. And I think that black people still should now, especially young athletes, I just think it's a message that maybe they need to rethink something.
Some people have been around age who tell me with Ernie Banks and Billy Williams, they used to play for the Chicago Cubs. For those of you who are younger, they lived in the neighborhood.
Of course they lived in the neighborhood, and even up until...
You said Ferguson Jenkins?
Right, and there were a couple of Bears, I can't think of them.
Some people, I know people, they knew Artis Gilmore played for the Chicago Bulls back in the day.
Sure.
In the neighborhood.
Sure, Mickey Johnson.
That was a different era, though.
Yeah.
And they practice in the city. They didn't practice in Deerfield, which is way north of the city.
But the Bulls practice in two places. They do practice in the city.
Well, mainly in Deerfield, which is way north for those of you who don't know.
But we understand how they get steered.
Then that's the problem.
Steered outside of the city. I taught high school, and Randy Brown, who was a former Bull, was one of my students. Mm-hmm. And Randy is from the south side of Chicago. And I'm saying he still frequented the west side of Chicago. He still frequented the west side of Chicago even when he was a Bull, but he lived in Olympia Fields. So my point is...
Which is a south suburb where many African Americans live.
Right, such as R. Kelly and people like that. But the point that I'm making is that, and now it is becoming a large African American suburb.
That's right.
But at least that in itself is okay.
Close. It's close.
That's right.
Yeah, you're in range.
And there is a form of protection. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that these guys' lives are in jeopardy in more ways than one.